Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, March 17th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The US thinks that Ukraine's ammunition use is unsustainable. So, this is according to a report from the New York Times, and it says that Ukraine is firing thousands of artillery shells each day in its battle to defend the Donbass city of Bakhmut. And US and European officials do not think that the pace that they're firing these shells at is sustainable. Two unnamed US officials told the New York Times that the Pentagon has raised the issue of Ukraine's ammunition use in Bakhmut after a few days of nonstop firing. Ukraine's war effort is entirely reliant on support from US to keep fueling this artillery war, as the Pentagon has shipped millions of artillery shells to the country. The report, this is the latest example of Ukraine's Western backers expressing doubt about Kiev's war strategy. The US wants Ukraine to launch a spring counteroffensive, but Western officials think that those plans could be jeopardized by the amount of resources Ukraine is using in Bakhmut. The US and Britain are preparing to ship thousands of more artillery rounds and rockets to Ukraine to shore up its supplies for a counteroffensive. So this is in the coming weeks that they're going to be shipping more ammunition. And the Times quotes a senior, speaking anonymously, senior Pentagon official who described these shipments in the next few weeks as a last ditch effort, because they're saying that they don't have enough ammunition to keep up with Ukraine's pace. So they're basically saying, that they're not going to be able to keep supporting this war for much longer. And the US and its NATO allies, they really weren't prepared to support such an intense artillery war. They didn't have enough ammunition in their stockpiles. And Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, the NATO Secretary General, he acknowledged this a few weeks back when he said Ukraine is using munitions at a much faster rate than the entire alliance, the entire 30-member alliance can produce. So that shows how much they're using. And, the US and all of its allies, they have big plans to ramp up the production of artillery rounds, but, it's going to take months before any significant progress is made on that. And of course, I just recap how Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut have told the media that they are already fighting with severe ammunition shortages. A lot of them say that, the enemy comes and we have nothing to shoot them with. So they're already dealing with that. And, the US wants them to put on this counteroffensive. There's been some doubts from Ukrainian officials saying that they don't have the resources to launch a counteroffensive. But, they keep sending fresh recruits into Bakhmut, which has become, this meat grinder. And Zelensky, again, this week, doubled down that they're going to keep defending this city. Excuse me. The next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute. And U.S. officials are saying now that over 100 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in the war. So this was from Politico. American officials estimate that at least 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in the year since Russia invaded. And Politico spoke with unnamed American officials who gave this death toll, because Ukraine keeps a very tight lid on their casualty rates. I think the last update they said something like, I don't know, maybe 13,000. I'm not sure exactly what they've been saying, but it's somewhere low, much lower than, what's really happening here. And so these officials said upwards of 100,000 Ukrainian forces have died, including the most experienced soldiers. So that's another thing that we hear from these Ukrainian soldiers that have been speaking pretty candidly to the media about their experience on the front line, is that, the combat veterans, a lot of them have been killed or injured, and they're sending in all these fresh recruits that barely have any training. So Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, on Wednesday, he spoke at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and that is the group of about 50 or so representatives from different countries, military, their defense ministers. It goes beyond NATO, but mostly, it's a NATO thing. And they hold these meetings every once in a while and pledge new support for Ukraine, talk about what they should give them. And, Austin's message at this most recent meeting was that Ukraine doesn't have any time to waste and that they have to ensure that Ukraine gets the training and the parts and, everything that they need. Basically saying, these next few months, this moment in the war is very pivotal as, after this spring, especially, when they're thinking about the ammunition use and the rate that they're using everything, you know, they don't think there's really going to be another opportunity for Ukraine to regain any territory. So this is kind of, it sounds kind of desperate the way Austin is talking and this information that's been coming out in the Western media when before, the narrative was that Ukraine is winning and, that they're going to be able to drive Russia out of all this territory. Now it seems like there's a lot of doubt being expressed about that. All right, the next one here, another big escalation from the NATO alliance. Poland will be the first NATO member to provide Ukraine with fighter jets. So this was on Thursday that Poland's president announced that they are going to give Kiev 4 of their Soviet-made MiG-29 fighter jets. These jets are going to be delivered in the coming days, he said, and Ukrainian pilots are trained to use these, the MiG-29, so the Polish planes are going to be able to be used in battle pretty much immediately upon arrival. Duda said that this is the president of Poland. He said that they will send more MiG-29s after the first 4 are delivered. So looking back, going back 1 year in March 2022, Poland offered to give these MiG-29s to the U.S. to transfer them to Ukraine. They wanted to give them to Ukraine. They didn't want to do it themselves, so they said, hey, we'll send them to your base in Germany, then you can send them to Ukraine. But the Pentagon said no. And the reason why they said no is because they were worried about escalating the war. And NATO diplomats and a lot of officials said at the time that Russia could perceive NATO providing fighter jets as the alliance directly entering the war. Now, a year later, that concern is gone. And Poland's move, of course, could inspire other members of NATO to provide Ukraine with aircraft. If you remember, Poland led the charge to give Kiev the German-made Leopard tanks. Poland said, we're ready to give our Leopards. They put pressure on Germany to allow the export license. They really were the ones leading the way on that. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ukraine's MiG-29 fighter jets that they're currently using are already armed with NATO equipment. The U.S. has been sending air-to-air missiles and other missiles that could be used by planes, including the AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles known as the HARMs. These are specifically designed to take out radar equipment, radar systems, and they have a range of about 50 miles. And Ukraine's MiGs are also firing the U.S.-provided Joint Direct Attack Munition extended range. These are precision-guided bombs that can hit targets up to 45 miles away. So Ukraine's Air Force is using NATO equipment. They still don't have any Western-made planes, and the U.S. hasn't said that they're going to send the F-16s yet. They're laying the groundwork for it. There's a lot of pressure on President Biden to do so, but they haven't taken the step to say, yeah, we're going to buy these planes for Ukraine. The British are also training Ukrainian pilots, or they're planning to start soon on how to use Western-made aircraft. So there's a lot of things moving in that direction. And I think Poland might get the ball rolling here by saying they're going to send the MiGs. There's other countries, I know Slovakia has MiGs, and they've expressed an openness to send them. So this just represents another big escalation of NATO involvement in the war. And I think it brings the NATO alliance closer to a direct war with Russia. All right. So the next one here. The U.S. released the video of the drone encounter with Russian fighters. So on Thursday, the Pentagon, they released a video that the Pentagon says this shows the encounter between the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone, the encounter that it had with 2 Russian fighters before being downed over the Black Sea. The video appears to show a Russian Su-27 flying near the drone and dumping fuel as it passed. And then the video shows what is either the same plane or a second plane making another pass and releasing more fuel. It's only a 42-second video. I'll play it here for the people watching. But you can't, so this view is a camera and it's looking, this is the back of the drone that this plane is approaching. You see, it looks like they're dumping fuel there. And then they show another plane approaching and make a similar maneuver. The video does not show the aircraft collide because the US says that one Russian fighter, made contact with the propeller of the MQ-9. But at the very end of the video, one of the propeller that is shown, one blade on it looks like it's bent. Just one blade. So you can see there. So if, I guess that's what happened, is that it just barely clipped the propeller if just one blade was bent. So you can't really tell exactly what happened here, but Russia's story is they're saying that they didn't collide with that the aircraft did not touch, and that the drone crashed after making a sharp maneuver. But then the U.S. puts out this video. So that's where we're at here. And of course, where we're at with the drone, the Russians are saying that they're gonna try to recover the debris. The US is saying, we don't think they're gonna be able to recover it. It's in really deep water or something. So it'll be interesting, because I know one of the reasons that the US has not given Ukraine these types of drones, not so much the Reaper drone, but I know the Gray Eagle drone, which is similar, that Ukraine has been asking for. And I forget if it's General Dynamics or General Atomics that makes that. But whichever company makes the Gray Eagle drone has been pushing the US to send them to Ukraine. And then the Pentagon doesn't want to do it because they're worried about Russia getting their hands on the technology in the Gray Eagle drone. So the Reaper drone, I'm sure there's things in there that they wouldn't want Russia to find, but they could end up with it, if they find the debris. All right, the next one here. Japan and South Korea work to rebuild military ties with U.S. backing. So South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, he met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Japan on Thursday as Tokyo and Seoul seek to thaw relations. And this initiative is backed by the U.S. as it seeks to rally its allies in the region against China. So this is according to Nikkei Asia. The two leaders agreed to bolster cooperation against North Korea and to resume a working level bilateral security dialogue that has been on a 5-year hiatus. So Yoon announced while he was in Japan, he announced the normalization of the General Security of Military Information Agreement. And this is a military pact between South Korea and Japan that allows the two countries to share military intelligence. In 2019, Yoon's predecessor, Moon Jae-in, the last president of South Korea, he said that Seoul would not be renewing this agreement with Japan in response to new export controls that Japan imposed on South Korea. The two countries also announced a trade agreement on Thursday that will lift these Japanese export controls. So they have a little trade agreement, and they're vowing to increase military ties. And this agreement, it allows them to share information on North Korean missile tests. So Yoon said at this press conference, he said, quote, "I believe the two countries should be able to share information on North Korea's nuclear missile launches and trajectories and respond to them," end quote. So this meeting between Yoon and Kishida, which took place in Japan, Yoon traveled over there. This is the first time since 2012 that a leader from Japan or South Korea visited with each other. So their relations have not been good. And Kishida said that from now on, there should be frequent visits. They want to keep this dialogue and communication going and these visits. And really the tensions between South Korea and Japan, they're strained over Japan's imperial rule of Korea from 1910 to 1945. The two countries have been working on an agreement to settle a dispute over Korean slave labor during the occupation. So I don't know too much about this agreement that they reached, that Yoon accepted from Japan on sort of reparations for this slave labor for these people that some of them are still alive that had to live under the Japanese occupation. But South Korea's opposition and many other people in the country are not happy with this proposal. And there's a chance, I think, maybe they might be able to block it. But Yoon seems to want to just, sweep it, settle this issue, sweep it under the rug and increase cooperation with Japan. And of course, the U.S. ambassador to Japan welcomed the warming of ties between these two countries and said North Korea and China will not be happy about the progress. This is Rahm Emanuel. He said, quote, our working together not only on the political front, but on the strategic front, on the deterrence front, is what North Korea is scared about. It's also what China doesn't want to see happen, end quote. So U.S. military leaders expect, a future war with China would likely also involve action from North Korea could get involved because a future war with China would probably mean, World War III. So they want they want South Korea to coordinate more with Japan on this. And of course, with China, as Kishida recently announced, Japan is doubling its military budget over the next 5 years as part of this military buildup against China. All right, the next one here. This is interesting. This is from Newsweek. As the U.S. grows Guam presence to deter China, wary locals are denied a choice. So this is about how the people that live in Guam, which is a U.S. territory, a lot of them are against the U.S. expanding all these military facilities. It's a small island, and they don't have a choice when it comes to what the U.S. is doing there. The indigenous people. So I'll just read a bit from this article. With tensions high between the US and China, one small island in the Pacific stands as a nuclear capable front line in what has the potential to be one of the devastating wars the world has ever seen. As the US military expands its already dominating presence, however, not everyone who calls Guam home wants any such part in such a conflict. And yet, the indigenous people living on the shrinking 2/3 of the island not already consumed by U.S. military bases have little to no choice in the matter. So they quote someone named Melvin Juan Pat Borja, the executive director of Guam's government's Commission on Decolonization. He said, quote, there are many in the community who are critical of the role that Guam as an unincorporated territory is forced to play in the posturing and aggression occurring between China and the United States. As a territory, Guam's relationship with the federal government and thus the Department of Defense is marked by consultation and not consent, end quote. So basically just saying that, the Pentagon is going to do what they want. They just fill them in on what they're doing, and the people there don't have a choice. I remember there was a new Marine Corps base that opened up, I think, in January, and there was protesters showed up during the opening ceremony. And this article just gives background on the complex history between the U.S. and Guam. The island is 6,000 miles from California, and it began. The U.S. seized this during the war with Spain in 1898. They seized Guam and the Philippines, and they had a brutal war in the Philippines and killed hundreds of thousands of people. There's concentration camps and torture. The U.S. war in the Philippines was something, they don't teach you about in school, but it's one of the most brutal wars the U.S. has been involved in. And Guam, it is an interesting situation. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, the U.S. has all these big bases there, and a lot of the people living there don't want them to be there. And of course, if the war does break out, that's a huge target for China. Just like Okinawa, just like Australia is going to become with this big submarine base. All right, the next one here. Senate resolution could stop Saudi arms sales. This is from Middle East Eye. A bipartisan pair of U.S. senators introduced a resolution on Wednesday that would require President Biden's administration to report on Saudi Arabia's human rights record and possibly cut off all U.S. security assistance to the kingdom as ties between Riyadh and Washington continue to fray. So this was introduced by Chris Murphy, who's a Democrat from Connecticut, I think, and then Mike Lee, who is from, I think he's Utah. They don't have the states here. He's a Republican. But they drew up a provision of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act, which allows Congress to vote to request information on a particular country's human rights practices. Senator Lee called the proposal a simple and fair request for the State Department to provide more insight into the status of human rights in Saudi Arabia. He said in a statement, quote, U.S. weapons don't belong in the hands of human rights abusers. The American people and their elected representatives have a right to know the types of activity we are tacitly supporting, end quote. If the resolution becomes law, the State Department would be required to submit a report on human rights in Saudi Arabia within 30 days, or all security assistance automatically stops. So I think it's good to see that there's some people in Congress still working against arming the Saudis, in the wake of this deal they made with Iran and China, and doesn't look like they're just ready to give them whatever they want in response to that. All right, the next one here. Arab nations look to make a deal on Syrian reconstruction. So this is according to a report from the Wall Street Journal, quoting unnamed sources, but I think there might be something to it just because what we've seen lately from other Arab countries in the Middle East when it comes to Syria. So the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday that Arab countries are offering a deal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad that would restore ties between Damascus and most countries in the region. The report cited unnamed Arab and European officials, said that these talks were initially led by Jordan, and these Arab nations have proposed billions worth in aid to help the country rebuild after 12 years of war, and to lobby the US and European governments to lift sanctions. In exchange, they want Assad to engage with Syria's political opposition and allow troops from other Arab states inside Syria to protect returning refugees. They want Syria to crack down on drug trafficking and prevent Iran from further expanding its presence in Syria. The report said the talks are in their early stages, and it's not clear if these are things, Assad is going to want to accept this initial offer. And, when it comes to lobbying the U.S., right now, the U.S. has shown no interest in lifting the sanctions on Syria, as the House recently voted to maintain them following the devastating earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey. And the U.S. sanctions are specifically designed to prevent Syria's reconstruction. So the U.S. will probably oppose this plan to help Syria with their reconstruction. And the Biden administration just recently said they're against regional countries normalizing ties with Damascus, even if it's related to helping them with the earthquake relief. So the Wall Street Journal report said what's significant about this effort is that Saudi Arabia is on board. And previously, Saudi Arabia was very, very against, bringing, normalizing with Syria. They haven't had diplomatic relations since 2012. But Saudi's foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan al-Saud, he recently called for dialogue with Damascus. He said, quote, "In the Arab world, there is a consensus growing that the status quo is not workable. We all have policies, but we don't have any strategy to implement that policy," end quote. So saying that the status quo with Syria is no good, the Saudis are saying. So especially in the wake of this deal between the Saudis and Iran to normalize, I think, it looks like, the Saudis are starting to think differently about the dynamics in the region. And I think them opening up with Iran will make them much more likely to open up with Syria. So hopefully this happens, and hopefully they do reach some kind of deal, and the U.S. is forced to back off and pull out of Syria. And hopefully they bring Turkey into this, and Turkey and Syria, start talking, and they've actually been talking, which is pretty significant. I believe it was their foreign ministers that met, or was it the defense ministers? I forget. Either way, it was a big deal, and around December or January that happened. So yeah, it would just be good if these countries get together and say, yeah, let's just all open up with Syria, help them rebuild, trade with Syria, and that might just force the U.S. to get out of the way. All right. So the last one here, this is a former Mossad chief, the Israeli spy agency, urges that Israel should think about, opening up with Iran, which is very interesting to say. Israel's former spy master has called for his country to explore whether a rapprochement with Iran is possible following a dramatic breakthrough in relations between Tehran and Riyadh last week. So this is Ephraim Halevi. He's the former director of the Mossad spy agency. He made the comments on Wednesday with an interview on CNN. And it was interesting. I actually saw a clip on this before I saw this article. He was asked about it, and he's saying that Israeli leaders should not prejudge the deal, but actually kind of try to work with it and think that, try to figure out why Iran and Saudi Arabia decided to do this, and that the Israelis should start thinking about seeking a different policy with Iran. Now, with the current situation, it's hard to believe that would happen, especially with Netanyahu and his officials always threatening to bomb Iran, although they have their hands full right now domestically with all these protests and the judicial overhaul they're trying to pull off. But it's just, I can't imagine Israel actually going in this direction. But I think it's significant to see a former Mossad guy, say this. Maybe there are people thinking of a different way inside Israel. All right, that's it for the news for the week. The Viewpoints, go check them out. We have a really good one from Lawrence Wilkerson about the tragic reality of Rachel Corrie's death. And so 20 years ago, well, it was March 16th, so 20 years ago on Wednesday, she was an activist, an American that was in the West Bank uh, protesting an Israeli demolition of Palestinian homes. She was only 23, and she was killed by an Israeli bulldozer. And that was 20 years ago. And it's his account about it, Wilkerson. And he was he in the Bush administration at the time? He probably was. Yeah, he was the chief of staff to the Secretary of State in 2003. So it's about, his account dealing with that situation and trying to bring the family justice. All right, the next one, Ted Snyder. Does Canada support regime change in Russia? About what Canada's foreign minister said the other day, saying that regime change is the ultimate goal. David Knox, major U.S. outlets found Seymour Hersh's Nord Stream scoop too hot to handle. And this is over at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. J.W. Rich, Syrian sanctions punish earthquake victims. So go check that out. And our spotlight is from Senator Rand Paul over at Responsible Statecraft. And he says it's time to rip up the president's blank check for war. And so there's this effort going on in Congress, and they're voting on, and they've advanced this bill to repeal the 2002 military authorization that was used to invade Iraq. But that's a symbolic authorization. They don't use that anymore. What is still used, though, what they use to justify the U.S. presence in Syria and Iraq and operations in Somalia is the 2001 AUMF that was passed right after 9/11 to invade Afghanistan. And so Senator Rand Paul is saying, the repealing 2002 AUMF doesn't really do it. You have to repeal the 2001 one, or you're not really going to get anywhere. It's really kind of just a way that these senators, I think, are trying to placate people that want to rein in presidential war powers. They say, oh, we'll repeal these other authorizations, but he doesn't even use those. All right. Well, that is it for me for the week. You could always support the show, antiwar.com/donate, like and subscribe on YouTube, share it around, all that. This weekend, Monday, March 20th marks the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So we're going to have a lot of stories about that. So, I'll talk to you after the weekend. Thanks for listening.